one, they don't want to address it directly. They don't want to address slavery directly. Remember, we're saying that slavery is something people are questioning. So you'll find that in the actual document itself, they do not use the phrase, although quite clearly a number of clauses in the Constitution refer to slaves. They had some very strong debates at times over some of the issues, particularly the slave trade. And so in the end, they compromise on the slave trade. They give it a 20-year window of time, from the time of the 1788 until 1808, before it can be ended. And it is, in fact, ended in 1808. The other questions are dealing with how to count, because you're going to have, there were a number of different compromises that are adopted in the Constitution on how to how to apportion representation between the states in the legislative branch of the government. And of course, the Senate, each state would be allocated 2 senators. But in the House of Representatives, you would be based upon population. And so you count the whole number of persons living in the state. And so how do you count slaves? And for the purposes of taxation and for representation, they settled upon 3/5, counting each one of them as 3/5 of a person. It wasn't really meant that they thought that that had any relationship to their human value. It was a formula that had been used back in the Confederation days to apportion taxation. And so that's where they got the concept from. It was actually something of a concession, ironically enough, to the northern states rather than the southern ones, because had they been counted as a whole person, those states would have had even greater representation in the legislature. In the Chesapeake region, we've got this problem of planters who are not comfortable with slavery anymore. And it's not particularly financially profitable, but they have a huge stake in it. They have a huge capital stake in it. And the thing that's even more profound is they don't know how they would deal with this 40 or 50% of their population of African Americans that had been held in bondage. How would you have them as citizens? As you go farther south, as you get to South Carolina and Georgia, you find that the slave system there, the rice system and indigo and what's called Sea Island cotton, is a thriving system. Those slaveholders won't want more slaves, and they're ready to hold on to the institution. And so to have gotten rid of it, to try to end it at the time of the Constitutional Convention probably would have meant that you sank any kind of agreement that was possible. So again, extremely difficult. It's not, though slavery is not as strong as it will later become in American history, it's a bit controversial because there are people who contend that that was the one moment before the American Civil War at which slavery might have been abolished. And there's a case that can be made for that, but I think in the end, if they wanted to have a nation united, and that was their key goal, was to create a United States of America. To do that, they had those 5 states that were slave societies. And they were a very important part of the new Union. In fact, Virginia was the single largest state in the Union. And so that was the difficulty that they faced. It's sad, true, would that they could have ended slavery at the time. I think, though, given the political constraints they were under, and with the fact that the paramount issue was creating a United States of America, even though probably the majority of people at the Constitutional Convention were uneasy with slavery, and had you done a poll, I very much suspect that perhaps a majority of the 55 present would have said, let's get rid of slavery. Nevertheless, I think they had to make the compromise that they made.